Soviet athletes are portrayed as machines. Like Rocky's Ivan Drago or in communist propaganda, the USSR's sports stars are seen as robotic, meticulous and extremely effective. In boxing, Soviet tacticians would ensure its practitioners were equipped with every possible tool to ensure success at the Olympics. As Soviet screenwriter Yuri Brokhin states in The Big Red Machine, pills or steroid derivatives flooded the market in the mid-60s, and there was a complete lack of drug control at Soviet athletic meets. Yet, even if true, strength and endurance alone doesn't guarantee gold in boxing. A crafted scientific style to wear down opponents and avoid risking punishment is needed. While personalities flourished and fans simply appreciated the art form in Western boxing, the Soviets were strategizing and conspiring, eventually devising a style based on maintaining distance, controlling the fight's tempo, and a jab-heavy strategy to outmaneuver opponents. Unbeatable, right? Well, it turns out the best way to defeat a robot is to refuse to play its game. Here's how you can overcome the terrifying Soviet boxing style. Please leave a like for the algorithm. In January 1986, the US faced the Soviet Union in an amateur boxing competition. The Americans would lose 11-0, being totally outclassed in the majority of bouts. Many of the US boxers backed off, fighting on the outside and allowing the Soviets to dictate the tempo. They deployed the pendulum step to great effect, darting in and out of range, pouring with the jab to distract before landing hard crosses. A concrete example of how not to fight the Russians. But the kryptonite had not yet been found. After all, the Soviets had experienced vast success in the Olympic Games and amateur tournaments, securing medal after medal. Losses were infrequent, but would primarily come against boxers within the Soviet sphere of influence, like Bulgaria and Poland, and fellow communist Cuba. Essentially, those with similar styles. But there is one major boxing powerhouse which has never really featured at the Olympic Games, nor had confronted the USSR's pugilists in the ring, yet its fighters possess traits which terrify Soviet-style practitioners.
Да, действительно, большинство советских боксеров пока уступают в искусстве ведения ближнего боя кубинским, корейским и американским спортсменам. Сближаясь с противником, они допускают много ошибок.
This Soviet documentary, likely dating back to the late 1950s, highlights the struggles of its practitioners when confronted by brawlers, who fight inside the pocket. The film was made to instruct younger boxers on how to deal with such opponents, largely through practicing close quarters combat as soon as possible. No matter how watertight a technique is, there will always be a chink in the armor, and the Soviets, despite devising a ruthless style, knew full well that other countries could adapt to unsettle its fighters. But infighting could hurt Soviets for a further reason. Through watching old Russian boxers training, you notice the disproportionate length of their arms. Brokhin highlights the morphological technique used to select young athletes according to biological maturity instead of age. This helps zero in on the sport for which a child is best suited. Those with broad shoulders, thick necks and overly long limbs are siphoned off into the boxing circuit. The USSR's top fighters like Alexander Yagutkin, Alexander Lebziak and Valery Popenchenko exhibited such traits. Though this is useful for fighting on the outside, the advantage gained is redundant once the opponent comes in close, with longer limbs requiring an increased range of motion and having less efficient leverage. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a refined, beautiful style to foil the Soviet boxer. The opponent just needs to be brave, willing to incur substantial damage while trading, and importantly, swarming their opponent. I present to you the Mexican warrior. Despite having the second highest number of champions, Mexico languishes in 26th in the Olympic medal table. The country rarely features in Olympic boxing, and for an in-depth breakdown as to why, check out my video on why they fumble at the Olympics, linked down below. Anyway, essentially Soviet boxers, who only featured in the Olympics and amateur competitions, were rarely confronted by high-level Mexican fighters. Hence, they never truly grasped the danger that they posed to their style. It was only after the collapse of the USSR in December 1991 that its boxers were allowed to enter the professional ranks that we finally begin to encounter how the Mexican style foiled the Soviet one. When a 38-year-old Julio Cesar Chavez was dismantled by Kostya Tszyu in July 2000, it perhaps suggested to boxing fans that the pressure forward fighting style would be trounced under the Soviet scientific pendulum. However, since then, the pendulum has largely shifted back. Juan Manuel Marquez smothered Ukraine's Sergei Fedchenko into submission in 2012, staying in the pocket and unloading vicious hooks. He upset Fedchenko's rhythm, jumping in when Fedchenko sought to, before utilising clinches to his advantage. It seemed consistent pressure and feinting paid dividends. But there were still cases of Mexicans failing to take heed. Against Dmitry Bivol, Zurdo Ramirez simply stood off the Russian, enabling him to establish a rhythm and land heavy jabs and crosses. When he did come forward, he seemed tentative, with Julio Cesar Chavez stating that Ramirez was boxing backwards in an un-Mexican manner. In the World Series of Boxing Championships, the Mexican Guerreros would lose 5-0 to Russia. Despite the forward aggression, it was too reckless and the punches were wild, making them easy pickings for the Soviet-schooled boxers. This reaffirmed the point that, though pressure is important, a degree of control is still vital to avoid handing the bout to the Soviet style. Only a few weeks later, the Mexican team would batter the Azerbaijani boxers 4-1, deploying the brawling style to far greater effect. This evidence suggests the Mexicans do have the key, they just need to deploy it effectively. In November 2019, Canelo fought the Russian Sergey Kovalev. Kovalev, having a 5-inch height advantage, relied on a strong jab and skilled footwork to control the space, while Canelo slowly marched him down, seeking to land power shots. With the bout being close, round 10 saw Canelo ramp up the pressure, fighting in the pocket and trapping Kovalev in the corners. As he ramped up the pressure, he caught Kovalev with a short left hook, sending him crashing to the canvas. The aggressive approach had cracked the Russian style. Now, of course, there are Russian boxers who have adapted their upright fighting style by refining the brawling capabilities. The Russian Evgeny Gradovich was frequently highlighted for this.
After my sparring, they say, "Oh, this is Mexican Russian."
He had a Mexican style type of fighting, brawlers.
His forward pressing style was exceptional, ranking up consistent wins by pressing opponents into submission. Yet, he only became truly unstuck when confronted by the Mexican brawler Oscar Valdez. While in the pocket, Valdez continually caught the Russian before sending him to the canvas with a chopping left hook. The brawling simply comes more naturally to the Mexican, it seems. We saw this trend continue when Belarus's Ivan Baranchuk attempted to trade with Jose Zapata, who, after a bloody war in which they both hit the canvas, sent Baranchuk to sleep. Though a valiant effort from the Belarusian, Zapata just seemed more naturally inclined to box on the inside. So, based upon this, the Mexican tends to be incredibly lethal to Soviet-schooled fighters, as they can disrupt their traditional style before schooling them once they try and adjust. However, smothering Soviet boxers isn't solely confined to Mexican pugilists. Kostya Tszyu was born in the USSR and raised by the Soviet sporting structure. He relied upon powerful punching and precise timing to overcome notable opponents like Zab Judah, Julio Cesar Chavez and Shamba Mitchell. But at the age of 35, he suffered a defeat in Manchester which ended his career. Ricky Hatton would showcase immense heart and stamina, stalking Tszyu around the ring and disrupting his rhythm at every opportunity. That night, Hatton displayed Mexican attributes, unsettling an experienced Soviet practitioner with his intensity. The most recent high-profile Russian-Mexican matchup is of course Dmitry Bivol against Canelo Alvarez. Unlike the bout with Kovalev, Bivol was smart, controlling the ring and pivoting out of dangerous situations as soon as Canelo sought to make it a slugfest. Bivol used the jab to devastating effect, imposing his power and skill upon the Mexican. In my own mind, though Bivol was otherworldly that night, Canelo afforded the Russian too much space, allowing him to pendulum step in and out while failing to trap him in corners. He targeted Bivol's arms throughout, failed to press forward with any conviction, and enabled Bivol to find his rhythm. Therefore, I do feel if he had rushed at his opponent and showcased relentless in-your-face pressure, the chance of success would have been bolstered. After all, we've seen some Soviet-style boxers undone by this, but maybe Bivol is just simply the real deal. I've made this video not only to evaluate the mesmerising Soviet style, but to also examine what could be the kryptonite, the technique which unsettles. Sadly, we haven't been blessed with too many matchups throughout the decades. But the fact that the Soviets themselves stated that infighting was an area of vulnerability underlines the worry behind swarming boxing styles. But now I'd like to hear what you guys think. How would you defeat the Soviet style? Are Mexican boxers the key? Please let me know what you think down below. Also, consider liking and subscribing if you are into this sort of content. More will be on its way and I greatly appreciate it. All the best guys. Cheers.